It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum.
Hey, and welcome. It's Dave here from the Life Is Peachy Podcast, and this is my second channel, the Limp Mixtape Sessions, where we kick back and chat about all things music, cinema, and the pop culture zeitgeist. Put this tape into your Walkman, slide on your headphones, and hit that play button. You're now listening to track 22 with Sammy Siegler. Lips, we are gathered here today to pay worship and tribute to one of the most influential post-hardcore releases known to man. And that is, of course, 2000's Everything You've Ever Wanted to Know About Silence. And from this point on, for the sake of tongue twisters and efficiency, I will refer to this album as Everything, which pretty much encapsulates what this album means to me, especially 25 years ago. This album is everything, and it won't be the last celebration for it within the Life Is Peachy universe. So if you too are a fan of this album, make sure you keep your ear to the ground in 2025. Because there's definitely more to come following track 22. Everything you've ever wanted to know about this album, I hear you ask? I've been patiently waiting for my opportunity to deep dive and give thanks and praise to this album. So let's get this party started before the disco ball spins away for another year. Everything fell under that God tier trifecta. Produced by Ross Robinson, recorded at Indigo Ranch, and released via Roadrunner Records. This was a debut that not only danced the line of ferocity and vulnerability, it reveled in it on an unprecedented level and created a songbook like no other. Like many, if not all, of the sessions captured up in the hills of Indigo Ranch, this was pure magic. Lightning in a bottle with regards to emotion and execution. An album that captures and articulates a moment in time, yet continues to give more and more nuance and subtext as the years roll on. These are the timeless albums. And today on the mixtape, we have drummer and New York hardcore royalty, Sammy Siegler, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Everything You've Ever Wanted to Know About Silence. His time in Glassjaw at the turn of the century, recording at Indigo Ranch with Ross, and how the album resonates with him today within his amazing, extensive body of work.
Yo, David.
Hey, good morning, my friend.
How are you, sir? You said it's 5 a.m. where you are.
Yeah, I've got a nice vibe going on though, surrounded by candles, and man, I'm beyond excited to rack your brains for one of the most special albums. So let me just start by thanking you for joining the mixtape and looking back on 25 years of everything you've ever wanted to know about Silence.
So wild. Yeah, of course, man. Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Now, full transparency, growing up in Australia and coming into the turn of the century, my access to certain pockets of music, genres, and scenes was somewhat limited because my lifeline to this was really only through whatever international music magazines would find their way down under, or even other bands my friends were listening to at the time. And without tooting my own horn, I will go ahead and say that within my circle of mates, at least for myself, I thought I was the most adventurous and committed when it came to putting on that detective hat. But having said that, and based on access to music around the world, or in this case, lack of, my experience with the New York hardcore scene and the hardcore scene in general was pretty limited. And so,
Right.
yeah, I first came across you and what you do thanks to Glassjaw and everything you've ever wanted to know about silence. And so I wanted to kick things off by asking, at the turn of the century leading up or prior to joining Glassjaw, what did your life look like in 1999 and how did that position and opportunity come to fruition?
Right. Well, cool. Interesting stuff. Yeah, it's funny you talk about hardcore because it is sort of the root of it all for me and kind of ties into the two records we're talking about in a way or in a big way. I grew up in New York City and I started playing drum. My dad's a drummer, my grandfather's a drummer, and I started playing when I was really young and coming up in the hardcore scene, late 80s and 90s and stuff. That was kind of my world. And so around 99, to answer your question, I think just to back it up a little bit, like, yeah, I was playing all these hardcore bands and that was my life growing up. Those were my friends and we put out records and we got to tour and it was, Youth of Today and playing in Gorilla Biscuits and playing in Judge and Shelter and all these bands. Around like 91, that kind of scene sort of died for, I think, a lot of us. You started seeing a lot of those hardcore bands breaking up and then there was like this whole kind of like post-hardcore movement that came from it when you saw bands like Into Another, Walter from Gorilla Biscuits started Quicksand, and you saw that happen. Bands like Helmet were coming out. There was a band called Orange 9mm who had Chaka from this hardcore band Burn. Everyone just sort of was growing up, learning more chords, writing more complex songs, influenced by grunge, whatever it may be, like that kind of kicked off. And that led into, I guess, like the mid 90s, which was sort of this like, Offspring, Green Day were blowing up and there was like this whole pop punk kind of thing. And I was in a band called Civ, which was also with my friends from back in the hardcore days, really for most of the 90s. So in 99, Civ was breaking up and we had done a bunch of Warped Tours and we had actually just toured in Japan. It was like, I think the last tour we did before breaking up. And after Japan, I think I might have went to play this really weird festival in Spain, in Madrid. It was like a really big rock festival, like Metallica was headlining or something, and I was playing with Youth of Today. And we played that, and I feel like shortly after that is when we made that Glassjaw record. So like 99 was interesting in that sort of like pop punk kind of era was also kind of ending. And Screamo maybe was coming up. And so when I met the guys in Glassjaw, they were hardcore kids. They were a little bit younger than me, which was different because I was always the baby in all my bands. I was started when I was 11 and 12 and touring when I was like 13, 14. But I was sort of the older guy a little bit in that band. And when I met them, they were also into this new, I don't know if it was Screamo or what you would call it, but you could hear the influence of like Deftones and some of this stuff, which my band Civ in the 90s toured with Deftones. They opened up for us. We did a lot of Warped Tours together. So I was kind of familiar with all of it, but in making that Glassjaw record, I realized that it was the beginning of a whole nother movement, a whole nother thing of this Long Island scene that was coming up with like Taking Back Sunday and some of these bands. Like Long Island really blew up and Glassjaw was this like really influential band, which I didn't expect, which is so cool about art or music or whatever. You go into it with just no real intentions of we're going to influence a bunch of new bands, but it did. And so I don't think that answers your question as far as 99. I was just still kind of growing up and about to enter this whole new phase of my life, which, I could keep talking, but basically I met my wife making that Glassjaw record.
Oh, wow, man.
Yeah. But in 99, meeting my wife, ultimately having a child, that was a huge turning point for my whole life, that record.
And what a huge year for you, for many reasons, to close off the century.
Yeah, it was cool. I remember like Y2K being with the producer, Ross Robinson, who produced that Glassjaw record, and he and I became friends, and we all went like snowboarding together for Y2K, and, the world was going to end, and it was a wild time.
Yup, and thankfully Y2K did not come to be, and we are now here 25 years later to celebrate this album. How did those paths with Glassjaw cross? Was it thanks to the integration inside the scene, checking each other out at shows, following each other in the music?
Yes and no. Again, it goes back to hardcore in a way. So there's a guy named Mike Gitter, old school Boston hardcore dude, had a fanzine called Triple X Fanzine, became an A&R guy, worked at Roadrunner, signed a lot of really, I'm sorry, before that, he was always in the music business, but he basically was at Atlantic Records and he signed my band Civ to Atlantic Records. It was called Lava/Atlantic. So we made 2 records together, or 1, I think, maybe, and then he left, but he ended up going to Roadrunner, which, I think had like Sepultura and like a bunch of bands, but he signed Glassjaw. Yeah, I think Gitter did sign them actually, or they're listening to demos, whatever. I don't know exactly how they were signed. But Ross Robinson, the producer, had his own label deal through Roadrunner called I Am Records. Basically, found this cassette. Ross was like, "Great, I want to put this record out. I want to produce it." Started doing pre-production, and just kind of realized that the drummer was not on the level that he wanted. So he fired the drummer, was looking for a replacement. And Mike Gitter recommended me because we had this history. And so I ended up getting the call and I came down to where they were doing pre-production. I think it was SIR Studios in Manhattan. And basically just walked in, and I had never met the guys. And again, they were a little younger. They're from Long Island. I'm from the city. So there's like a difference there. And they were bummed because their buddy just got fired, their drummer, their friend. In their defense,
Yeah.
just got signed to this label, making a record, and it's all sort of new to them. But I got in right away and we started working on a song a day. And I think then they realized that, okay, this was like a good step for them for the music, and Ross was psyched. And it was really cool. I learned a lot from Ross Robinson in that in pre-production, you just kind of go through a song. Okay, here's a song. This is how it goes. All right, well, you know what? Like this one part's not that great, or this other part's amazing. Let's do it again. Or let's get rid of this, or let's start it differently, or let's change this, or let's change that. Little tweaks. At the end of the day, Ross had like a boombox, a cassette player, and he hit record, and we recorded it. The next day we did it again. Next day we did it again. Next day we did it again. Like 10 days later, we had the record. And he basically said, like, this is your record on this cassette. He's like, we're going to go to California to the studio and we're going to record it. But this is it. Like, if you don't like this, then you're not going to like your record. And I thought that was really, just true. And even from then on, just like the importance of pre-production and doing the work and really working on the songs. And so that's kind of when I met those dudes. And obviously, with hardcore music and culture, but really with hardcore, like you speak the same language, you realize, oh, we both like the Bad Brains. They liked Quickness. Like Daryl's got like a Quickness, which was a later record, tattoo on his arm. I liked the first record, so we had our differences, I think, because of age and where we grew up, but we were connected by hardcore. They liked my old bands, Youth of Today and stuff. And they were just nice people. So we all hit it off.
So that's a pretty big step. Those circumstances coming into the band with the firing of their drummer and friend, pre-production on the debut album, signing a record deal, working with Ross, who was well and truly, the guy by this stage. What memories do you have in terms of that band dynamic and chemistry with yourself, Daryl, Beck, Todd, and Manuel? At that point, how far into it all were they with the songs?
After doing that pre-production, we went out to California, Topanga Canyon, to the studio that the band The Moody Blues owned. It was called Indigo Ranch. It was like a 40-acre ranch up in the hills above Malibu. And it was really nice, and it was cool. All of us being from the East Coast, like it's always fun to go to California, and now you're making a record, so you got like a little budget, and there's the studio, and that's always fun. And for me, like I was just kind of the new hired gun sort of dude, so I was getting paid to basically work on music. And like I said, the first day we had like a sort of a barbecue, and the manager of the band, his roommate was this girl who was in town with her friend, and they came by, and that's how I met my wife. She and I hit it off, and so it's just like a real magical energy, and we go swim in the ocean, all of us, and shoot basketball, and this, so we hit it off. But like I said, I was a little bit older than those guys, probably like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years or something, and I'd been around a little longer and signed to some record labels and just had a little more experience. So that was a new dynamic. They're all just different. We all really hit it off. I'd known Manny a little bit. Manny maybe was a little bit older, and he was in some other hardcore bands. So Manny and I had a little bit of history. Beck was just funny. He was just like a character. I think there's pictures of him like naked recording somewhere, and he would just bug out, like wrapped himself in saran wrap, I think. But Ross was really like the leader of the whole thing, mainly the vibe, which again I learned a lot from. So like anytime you're in the studio and shit was getting weird, or the band like we're tired or whatever it may be, you'd just be like, all right, stop, and we'd all go run through the woods, and then we'd come back, and then you're fucking feeling good again, and we'd hit record. Really, like the thing that was special about Ross and that record was like he would be in the room a lot of times, or he would have friends in the room. People that were hanging out at the studio would come when, like, say Daryl was tracking vocals. So I remember one time we're in there and he would say, what's this song about? Like, tell me. And Daryl was just like, oh, it's about my girlfriend broke up with me. And then he'd kind of push him and be like, no, dude, like, what is this song about? And Daryl's like almost in tears. And he's like, look, he's got Crohn's disease. He's like, I was in the hospital. I was bleeding. I was losing a lot of blood. It was bad. And my best friend was fucking my girlfriend. Everyone in the room was just like, holy shit. And Daryl's like almost in tears. And Ross was just like, boom, hit record. And I think the song was Mature. Things like that. Just really getting it out of you. Whereas I'd made other records where it felt like you're in a doctor's office a little bit, where it's just like, okay, that was great, do it again. Okay, yeah, do it again, do it again. Where Ross was really about the vibe. And so the vibe was on a high level. And I think that's part of why that record is so special.
Being up in the mountains recording our Indigo Ranch has always just sounded like the perfect place to facilitate just being immersed in the emotion and getting swept up in the music.
Yeah, it's doing the hard work before you go there. So the band wrote the songs, they demoed them, we did the pre-production. Actually, to back it up just a little bit, they did a demo at the studio. This guy Don Fury, who had a studio on Spring Street, who's an old friend of ours, recorded a lot of great hardcore bands, Agnostic Front and Gorilla Biscuits and a bunch of shit. And I'd recorded there, and so Glassjaw actually went there and did their demo, and I had heard it because I had a record label called Some Records with some friends of mine, and I'd heard it and I liked it, but I didn't love it. Like there was, I don't know, I just we were doing different stuff with Some Records, I guess. But my point being the hard work, and the reason why the vibe was so good there is because we were prepared. You know, by the time we got to Indigo Ranch to make the record, we knew what we were doing, and the songs were really fucking good. And we were just like, now is about let's try and capture that. So we did. You know, we recorded just a little bit every day, and I remember we recorded everything together like as live as possible, which I think is great for that kind of music. But I do remember the Sun Motel like kind of giving me a hard time and like not being able to lock it in, and you know maybe people were distracted or we were fucking around or something. So Manny and I just went into the room and just he and I recorded that alone. That was a real special memory because we just fucking went for it and we got it. And that song was hard to play. A lot of that shit was challenging for me. It was a lot of like single bass drum, no double bass drum, just all single pedal shit. And so
Yeah, man, the pedal work is crazy on this album.
yeah, I mean, a lot of it's just Ross pushing me, and he really was into this thing of having a kick drum under a snare drum. Normally, just, you know, blah, 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 pop, blah, 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 pop, blah, blah, blah. And he wanted this bass drum under the snare drum. Blah, 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 blah. And so that was just like, all right, he was just push me. You got to be pushed sometimes.
And something like the single kick, is that been something you took on moving forward that became a part of your style, or anything
Yeah,
else that was implemented on this album?
yes, definitely. I think the first song that Rival Schools ever released was a song called Accept the Compliment, which was like on a CD sampler or something the label put out. But, you know, that had like a part where it's just that driving bass drum, you know, throughout the whole thing. And that's what I like about, well, I guess, getting older. Like I'm 51, no, I'm 50 now. Playing since I was 6 or 7 and just making a lot of records and playing with different people. Like you pick up things and it all just makes you who you are now. So yeah, like I definitely picked up things on that Glassjaw record. It was cool. Beck is a really good drummer. He thinks real mathy. He's into that more mathy shit that maybe than I am. Meshuggah and like bands like that. And so he would like throw patterns at me that pushed me that I ultimately kept some of those tricks for sure.
Yeah, I mentioned when we kicked things off that this was my first introduction to you as a drummer, and because of this album and the single pedal work, the kick under the snare technique, as opposed to using double kick on the album, it was just something laced throughout the songs that I really attached to and extremely loved. And it kind of sparked a whole thing between my brother and I. Anytime we would hear it used by other drummers in future albums, we would just kind of look at each other and bounce our finger up and down, just a single finger, and we would just endearingly reference to it as the Glassjaw single kick.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, man. Working with Glassjaw, are there any other examples where you had to evolve your style, or were you bringing in a lot of your influences and playing techniques from your years as a drummer within the hardcore scene?
Yeah, I guess a little bit of both. I mean, Beck, the guitar player, is a good drummer and he wrote a lot of those parts. So songs like Pretty Lush had like a part already that I had to learn. But that said, like I definitely had my own bag of tricks and my style at the time that I'd gotten from the bands that I'd played in previously. So I guess met them sort of halfway. But I think what's cool, like I have an appreciation for kind of punk and hardcore people that play metal. I think it's like a fun sort of space to play in, like early Sepultura with like Igor obviously gets it. He understands punk and hardcore, but understands metal, or even like Dave Lombardo a little bit. Just like playing in that space. So I think that's where, yeah, like a metal dude might have played it with double bass drum pedal and more metal approach. But I think that for better or for worse, the hardcore influence in me, I think you could hear that on that record. Even like that song Siberian Kiss, The that's like a shaker that I overdub because like my dad is a drummer. He's a Brazilian drummer. He has like a samba school, and so I play a lot of that percussion. So those kind of influences that I was able to put in, or the 6/8 song, the title track, everything you want to talk about sounds where I was playing that beat, it's like a 6/8 beat, and Ross was actually taking his hands and putting them on the snare drum and kind of letting them up and then putting it down and letting them up. So muting it and not muting it. And that's kind of how you had this like thing going on, which more of a collaborative thing. It was like Ross coming in and my thing, and everyone was allowed to be creative, you know. So those guys, when it came time for guitars, like they were had a bunch of pedals out that I don't think they'd ever used before. And that's what Ross brought to it. And Ross was fucking with these pedals and these different sounds. And it was shit that the guys wanted to do, but that's kind of the job of a good producer is to bring it out.
And so, did you have much knowledge of Ross before working with him, or had you heard of any of the, let's say, urban legends, so to speak?
Not really. And to be honest, like I just kind of heard he was like the Limp Bizkit corn guy, which I thought was kind of cheesy because I never really liked that stuff at the time when it was coming out. You know, I don't know if you remember, but when Limp Bizkit first came out, it was like, you know, for me, it was a little cheesy. I was not into it. So that was my thing with Ross. But the more I got to know him, I realized, oh, okay, he did Sepultura Roots. I love that
Mm.
record, you know. And then shortly after, he did At the Drive-In, and he's just cool. And I think it's cool. Like I love hardcore people, but I think it is cool that people that really like aggressive music and the same sort of emotion, but are not necessarily from the hardcore scene. And that's kind of
Yeah.
Ross. Like he gets the passion and the fire and the fucking intensity, but he's not necessarily like a hardcore guy the way I am.
And so, how did all of that fire and energy, that experimentation and vibe feel on a day to day basis working through the songs?
It was good. I mean, we did it all to tape, to 2-inch tape. And so the way you edit on tape is Ross would take a razor blade out and cut a piece out and throw it on the floor and then move a piece over and do like little edits.
That's crazy.
hmm That kind of shit made me nervous a little bit. I mean, as a drummer, like you want to know that your performances were great and it's all set, everything's great. But there was like one or two parts or a few parts where it's like I knew he was going to make an edit, and I was like, "Fuck, how's this going to turn out?" So I was a little bit like uneasy with that, I guess. But I also trusted him. And a few days later, I would listen while those guys were tracking vocals or whatever, guitars, and realized like, yeah, this is good. I'm into it. And again, like I met my wife, so we were psyched. I was like falling in love and up in California and just trying to just keep the vibe up with everyone. My band Youth of Today, our singer was in town. So he actually came up one night and we recorded a Youth of Today song called Modern Love Story, which I think is a B-side on one of the Glassjaw singles or something.
Yeah, I'll link that one in the description for track 22.
Mm-hmm. It's probably on YouTube, but it's so Ray and Daryl sang it together. I don't know if you ever heard that, but so the singer for Youth Today, Ray Capo, and yeah, Daryl basically tracked vocals together in the same room. Yeah, I was just sort of trying to do things like that and coordinate a few things.
I've always wondered why your stint in Glassjaw was so short and sweet. I loved all the band promo photography with this era and this lineup, and it all just looked so good. I don't know how to explain it, but the lineup just felt like Glassjaw, looked like Glassjaw. It just all really came across as something iconic, and I was under the impression you were a part of the official lineup, but perhaps were you session?
No, it was hard. I had started a new band with Walter Schreifels. You know, he and I were in Youth Today together and Gorilla Biscuits back in the mid 80s, late 80s. And then Walter produced Civ and he started Quicksand, and he and I started this band called Rival Schools. So Rival Schools had just like started writing, and we had a record deal as well and some momentum and excitement. And it was with Ian and Cash, who are two old friends of mine. And it just was like really excited about it. Less hardcore, a little more, I guess, alternative or something. So I was just psyched on that record. And so when I was doing Glassjaw, we made the record and then they had some shows and I ended up playing those shows. We played like in Long Island. We played the Limelight in New York, I think with Slipknot. We played at Brownies in New York. And, you know, there was a lot of like, yeah, like they want me in the band. I want to be in the band. And I was trying to do both for a second. And it just became apparent that like both bands were going to get really busy and I kind of had to choose. So ultimately choose Rival Schools, you know, which I'm happy about. It was a tough decision. Like I don't regret it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was tough. I think Glassjaw was great, but again, at the time, Rival Schools was just where I wanted, you know, musically, and I had way more history with those guys. Yeah, that's why I had to leave Glassjaw. And then they got Larry Gorman to play drums. And then the same thing I think happened on the second record, though, where Ross basically brought in a different drummer, Shannon Larkin, I think. But then
Yeah.
Larry continued to play, and then they broke up and got back together or something. I don't, you know. But yes, I couldn't be in two places at once, so I had to pick one or the other.
Yeah, it's funny when you're younger and you come across music that has had an impact on you, you can tend to put a lineup and those faces in that lineup to the music to represent the music. I remember figuring out you weren't in Glassjaw anymore, and high school Dave was devastated.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like I'm not really a big like session guy. There's certain drummers who do that, and I think it was more of an LA thing, and maybe growing up in New York, I just didn't. I was more of like a band person. Like all my bands prior to that, you know, Youth Today, Judge, Side by Side, like these were like my babies, my bands.
You're a rock in a hard place.
Yeah, yeah, it was a tough one, but it's just kind of how that played out. Yeah.
And it's so great you were able to play some shows at least. So, yeah, how was that playing those songs live?
It was great. I wish there was more of like I think there might be one video, but we played with Candiria in DC, and then like yeah, those other shows I mentioned. There's certain people that have this kind of explosiveness. I guess a lot of bands like at the right time. It just was like, you know, Daryl's energy was just fucking explosive. All those guys, you know, Todd and Manny and Beck. And I think the five of us really had a thing that was yeah, it was kind of magical, not to be cheesy, but it was like yeah, magical, explosive, all that shit. We had the songs especially because we had, you know, just recorded, we were tight, we knew what we were doing, and the timing of like again where the scene was, I guess, or where like it just was like the right time. Like holy shit, this is, you know, it's heavy, but it's also got some other shit going on.
Man, I'm just imagining being at one of those shows and amongst that energy. It would have been something for the book, such a moment in time, right?
Hmm. Yeah, especially in the smaller venues, like the Long Island show was really small. Brownies was small. You know, it's always nice when you can see a band on there when they're kind of coming up in a tight, intimate setting. So yeah, it was cool.
And with everything turning 25 and having that cult status and influence on so much music, where does it actually sit for you personally and creatively within your massive body of work?
I mean, there's like a sloppiness to the record, which I guess like there's a rawness, which both I love about it, but also I guess kind of not bugs me, but just it's like abrasive to listen to maybe or sloppy at times. But I do think that that's kind of part of the magic of it, the fact that things might speed up or slow down. But no, I don't know. It's I'll put it on occasionally to listen to. Like it's really cool and it brings back a lot of memories for me. And yes, I enjoy it. So I do listen to it occasionally, and yeah, and I look back at it with really good memories.
As do so many of us, everything definitely holds a very near and dear place in a lot of our hearts and influences. So, Sammy, it's been great to look back on Glassjaw's debut and celebrate its rightful place in the pop culture zeitgeist. Thank you so much, man, for your time and energy and for everything you've ever wanted to know about silence.
All good. Yeah. This is so cool. Thanks again for thinking of me. And yeah, I'm glad this worked out. Thank
you. Lips, I hope you enjoyed track 22 of the mixtape sessions and the first chapter of my celebration for Glassjaw's Everything You've Ever Wanted to Know About Silence in 2025. If you're new here to Life Is Peachy and this is your first time checking it out, there is a back catalogue of tracks waiting for you right now, ready for you to pop into your cassette Walkman or, of course, your CD Discman. Chats with members of Sworn In, Fear Factory's Dino Cazares, Sepultura's Andreas Kisser, Rob Flynn and ex-Machine Head drummer Dave McLean, Australia's Sunk Lodo, Spineshank's Johnny Santos and Tommy Decker, ex-Crazy Town founder and co-vocalist Brett Epic Mazer, Sweden's Fly of Change, Headpiece OG Sticksman Ben BC Vort, and Vision of Disorders Tim Williams, just to name a few.
Wow.
And if you're a veteran Lip listener, thank you so much for your love and support. If you want to see more interviews and continued growth with all of this, then join the Lip community. Please, your support with what I do here on both the mixtape sessions and the Life Is Peachy podcast really makes a difference, and you'll definitely be rewarded for it over at
Patreon.com/ Life Is Peachy Podcast.
And on top of all that, you will have my eternal gratitude. And well, that's about it for me for now. Onwards and upwards in 2025, and give everything a spin until we hang out again. Thank you for your time and energy. As always, you were amazing. And